These are my top stacks for week 9 on DraftKings and FanDuel, and we're starting right now. What's up, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by hitting the subscribe button and make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. And if you are already a Holkamaniac, you know exactly what time it is. Smash that like button and we'll get rolling. All right, guys, my first DFS stack that I have for you in week 9 on DraftKings and FanDuel is going to be Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Going to bring that back with Chris Godwin on the other side for Tampa Bay. It's always kind of a tough decision to decide who to go with between Godwin and Mike Evans. Both are certainly fine in this stack. I will say that Mike Evans had a lot better matchup last week against the Titans than Chris Godwin. This week, it could easily be Godwin because he's probably going to be facing the Seahawks cornerback Jamar Taylor, who's definitely a liability back there. So I think that Chris Godwin in particular is someone I want to start with that because I think that's a big part of kind of this stack overall. So it's one of the things that I really like about Godwin in each and every week is his yards per route run over the last 4 games. This is a metric that historically has given us some of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL. And Chris Godwin is still top 7 in that category. If we take out some of the smaller samples, is easily in the top 3 on this smaller slate this coming week. So Chris Godwin, 7,300 on DraftKings, 82 on FanDuel. He's expensive, but 2.7 yards per route run is a pretty elite number. So against this team that I do think can be beat through the air, I'm interested in Chris Godwin on the other side of the stack. But now let's circle back to the core piece of this stack, and that's the Seattle passing game. So Russell Wilson, 7,100 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. He's going to be a little bit chalky, but I do think if you can differentiate with the rest of your roster, this game is just shaping up for a ton of plays in general. I have them projected for the second highest as far as overall plays in this game. But as far as team totals, I do think that this is one that we want to be attacking. As far as the quarterback position, we know team total is extremely important. So I'm in on that for this week with Russell Wilson. I will say that his yards per attempt is extremely impressive as well. Third highest on the slate at 8.5 yards per attempt this season. And we know Russ is going to give us a little bit on the ground as well. Having projected for just under 30 rushing yards in this game. It is a pretty massive pass funnel against Tampa Bay, so always want to kind of mention that. I think that this is going to be one that is relatively popular throughout the week. And I will say as well, Tampa Bay has been beat deep this year. So 24th versus the deep pass. So I think Russell Wilson makes a ton of sense this week. And let's start with DK Metcalf, because I think that Metcalf is an interesting one because he has kind of that locked in role at the goal line and in the red zone. And there's a lot of value in that, especially for a wide receiver for a quarterback that is as efficient as Russell Wilson is. So I think that DK Metcalf, while he didn't see a ton of volume last week, he's still kind of a prime regression candidate even after scoring those touchdowns last week. So I think that in this spot, massive team total, I mentioned that before, but just the specific involvement that DK Metcalf has at 5,700, he still seems like a really solid value in this spot to me. And on the other side of this, Tyler Lockett, he's someone that I probably won't be going near on my main team or in a smaller field or cash game situation, but at 7,500, they've done a lot with the pricing this week to make it a little bit tougher to get to these guys. But in tournaments, I definitely think Tyler Lockett still makes a really strong play. I mentioned that Tampa Bay can get beat deep. And if we're just looking again at something like yards per route run, Tyler Lockett's still in kind of the top third or so of some of these these wide receivers that are priced up a little bit. So I think that he's interesting. One of the metrics that I really like as well is total yards per game over the last 4. So that's kind of where the Mike Evans versus Godwin kind of gets a little bit more foggy. Obviously, Evans just had a massive week as well, but both of those guys are in the top 3 on this slate. Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, averaging almost 100 yards or more through the air over the last 4 games. So for me, it's Godwin on the other side of this, but I think that this is one of the stacks that I'll be building around in larger field tournaments. So my second stack might seem a little bit off the board, but I will say that after last week paying up for Deshaun Watson in my main team, I wanted to give you guys a really low price quarterback stack to kind of work into some of your tournament teams as well. For me this week, I surprisingly am really interested in this Miami and New York Jets game. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, 4,800. I'm going to be stacking him with Preston Williams, Devontae Parker, and then I'm going to be bringing that back with Le'Veon Bell on the other side of this game for the Jets. So I do think that this is a stack that makes a ton of sense in tournaments, especially if this game ends up going under own. Both really poor defenses, but let's start with the Miami side of the ball. So Fitzpatrick, it's pretty obvious that Miami probably has one of the worst, if not the worst, offensive line in the entire league, but the Jets are honestly one of the worst teams as far as pressuring the quarterback. So I think Fitz is going to have a little bit of time. He is someone that historically has had a pretty high yards per attempt, so he's not scared to throw the ball downfield, which just happens to set up perfectly in this matchup. So the Jets actually 8th at defending the short area of the field, 28th versus deep passes. So I think that Fitzpatrick could be in for a big game through the air, so I'm interested in him. I think Preston Williams is my favorite play for the entire offense on the Miami side of the ball. So I do really like him quite a bit. I think he's kind of a prime regression candidate. 4,200 on DraftKings, 55 on FanDuel. One of those guys that's always kind of popping in weighted opportunity rating, anything that you kind of value as far as the air yard side of things. Preston Williams seems like he has emerged as Ryan Fitzpatrick's favorite target, at least in kind of the small sample we do have of that. He was still targeting him pretty heavily, even though he was being kind of matched up against Joe Hayden last week. So I still think that he's probably the guy, especially if we're going to see those deeper routes. But if we wanted to circle back to Devontae Parker as well, full disclosure, this is not a guy that I've really played a ton of over the years. But I mean, over the last 2 weeks, 10 targets, 8 targets, he hasn't really had a huge ceiling, but he's gotten the end zone in 3 of those 4 weeks, and he's playing a decent amount of snaps as well. So I think Devontae Parker at 4,400 again. I wanted to give you guys a cheaper stack to try and piece in some of these better running back plays that we have around your lineups as well. So if Devontae Parker ends up being one of the lower owned options in this game, definitely think he's squarely in play at 4,400. Again, I mentioned how much better the Jets are at defending shorter passes, so I think that kind of takes Albert Wilson out of this stack for me. So rolling the stack back with Le'Veon Bell, I get it, 7,700, pretty expensive for a guy that kind of didn't see a ton of touches last week, but I will say that this price tag for the volume that he should be getting, and I do think if they do get him back involved, it's always a little bit of a risk when you're kind of targeting a Gase-led offense, but Miami 31st against the run on the ground, 32nd against running backs in the passing game. If we can project Bell for anywhere close to his 24 or so touches, I think he's a fantastic play at 7,700. He's going to be the guy that's definitely involved in this spot. I could see going to someone like Robbie Anderson on the other side of this stack as well, but the wide receiver corpse just feels a little bit muddled to me. Crowder and Demaryius Thomas kind of cannibalizing each other. I do think that Robbie Anderson would be the guy, but I just feel more secure going to a back like Le'Veon Bell on the other side of this stack and just kind of piecing in the rest of my lineup from there. The Miami guys just give you a ton of flexibility from a salary perspective. And even though this isn't a big total on either side of the ball, I do think that some of these guys are pretty drastically underpriced. For my third and final stack for you guys this week, I am going to be going to Buffalo versus Washington. Not interested in really anyone on the Washington side of the ball of this game. So I'm going to go with Josh Allen to John Brown and Cole Beasley. So I do think that it is on paper a tougher matchup for someone like John Brown. So let's talk about him first. Josh Norman is going to be matching up again. I don't know if they'll be shadowing him. He hasn't shadowed a ton this year overall. So John Brown at 6,100, I think makes an interesting leverage play in tournaments this week. So I think there's going to be some better options on paper in this game. But John Brown, someone that if we do get some deeper targets in this game, again, not a great matchup from that perspective. It shapes up much better for Cole Beasley, who I'll get to in a minute. I think John Brown is interesting in tournaments in particular. Just does have a top 10 weighted opportunity rating. His yards per route run is relatively solid as well over the last 4 games. So John Brown, I definitely think has a huge ceiling in this spot, even though he's going to come at drastically lower ownership. I'm interested in him on this smaller slate. In terms of ceiling, Josh Allen at 6,500 doesn't really jump off the page, and I do think that his volume has definitely been a concern this year. It could be a concern against Washington as well. I do think anytime you can start with 40 or so rushing yards on the ground, it is almost always really intriguing to me. So I'm interested in Josh Allen if you do get him at significantly lower ownership against this pretty poor Washington defense. And I mentioned that they are pretty poor, especially against short passes, 28th in the league in short passes. So to me, it just could be another Cole Beasley game. I actually played Beasley last week because of the win concerns that we had in this game. Had him at about sub 1% ownership in a couple tournaments I was in. So I think that people will probably be on to Beasley. He did catch a touchdown last week. Not a ton of volume there, but at 4,100, I think he makes an interesting stack target in this game in particular. So I'm interested in Cole Beasley on kind of the last piece of this stack. I don't think there's like a massive ceiling by any means, but these guys are cheap enough that, again, I wanted to give you guys some cheap options that you could get in some of the best running back plays on the slate. People are going to want to play Dalvin Cook. People are going to want to play Christian McCaffrey. As long as you get unique with at least one spot of your team, I think starting with one of these cheaper stacks, and this week in particular, makes a ton of sense. If you want to learn more about how to be a profitable DFS player, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right-hand corner. Check out my live streams on Twitch every Sunday morning at 11:30 Eastern Time, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. And while you're over there, check out my bio. I'm going to be running a contest over on LinkedIn again this week for a couple free entries. All the details are over on Twitch for that as well.